Eventually, you'll see a slide later on about the hundreds of thousands of people that were hauled out and lives saved. We had 5 helicopters. Believe me, we didn't do all that with 5 helicopters. So eventually there were medical evacuation units all over South Vietnam. But 1962, April, we were the first unit, and we had 5. This is a guy named Joe Galloway, and you can see he just died last year. He was an awesome human being. He was a reporter. He wasn't a soldier. And he had a habit. He spent 4 tours in Vietnam. Now, I don't know what a tour length of time is for a reporter, but he spent 4. But he was known for saying things like, I understand there's going to be a battle over here. I got to get me a ride out there. Or he would say, there's a battle going on over there. Somebody give me a ride out there.
I don't know if there's anybody here today who doesn't thrill to the sound of those blades. That familiar whop, whop, whop is the soundtrack of our war, the lullaby of our younger days. To someone who spent his time in Nam with the grunts, I've got to tell you that noise was always a great comfort. It meant someone was coming to help. Someone was coming to get our wounded. Someone was coming to bring us water and ammo. Someone was coming to take our dead brothers home. And eventually, someone was coming to give us a ride out of hell. Even today, when I hear it, I stop, catch my breath, and think back to those days. I love you guys as only an infantryman can. No matter how bad things were, if we called, you came. Down through the green tracers and other visible signs of a real bad day, off to a real bad start. To us, you seemed beyond brave and fearless, that you would come to us in the middle of battle in those flimsy, thin-skinned crates, and in the storm of fire, you would sit up there behind that thin plexiglass, seeming so patient and so calm and so vulnerable, waiting for the offloading and the onloading. We thought you were God's own lunatics, and we loved you, still do. We're the fortunate ones. We survived when so many better men gave up their precious lives for us. We owe them a sacred debt to live each day to its fullest. What they're saying when you listen hard enough is this: we're at peace, and so should you be, and so should you be.
He's not talking about just medical evacuation pilots. He's talking about helicopter pilots in Vietnam. The Yui hat. I get no comments about this hat because I got the Yui on it. There's other hats I've had, people just don't pay any attention to me. But people always want to come up and talk about the Yui. Often I am asked, did you, me, notice how they underline you, did you really fly a Yui? I always say, my answer always is, yes, I did. Back then I was taller. I was better looking. And I was a lot younger. How young?
A lot. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's not right. It was this year, I think. medical evacuation dust off. It's still dust off. From, and I've seen this published many times, dedicated, unhesitating service to our fighting forces. It was not really that high. It was our first call sign. A call sign that would not be changed. Those who were in charge of changing things, the Signal Corps, tried to change it to hickory smoke while I was there. The change was rejected, and today, as I said, medical evacuation is still dust off, Army medical evacuation. My call sign was dust off 78. Thank you for your service. We hear that more now than we used to, right? I was back from Vietnam for 45 years before someone thanked me for my service. And this thank you really didn't qualify because he was trying to sell me a computer at the time. Best Buy. Remember Harry Reasoner?
Yeah.
My children don't remember Harry Reasoner. Harry Reasoner wrote in 1971, that's why being a helicopter pilot is so different from being an airplane pilot. And that's why, in generality, airplane pilots are open, clear-eyed, buoyant extroverts. And helicopter pilots are brooders, introspective, anticipators of trouble. They know if something bad has not happened, it's about to. Wikipedia says flying into an active landing zone to pick up wounded is a dangerous job. Slightly more than a third of the aviators became casualties of their work, and I'm actually surprised it's only a third. To be more exact, 2,209 pilots were killed, 2,704 medics or crew chiefs were killed. And again, I'm surprised it's only a third. The dangers of the work was further borne out by the high rate of ambulance loss to hostile fire, 3.3 times that of all other forms of helicopter missions. Despite the prior slide, dust-off got things. Over 900,000 evacuations, over 500,000 missions flown. If we'd have done that with 5 helicopters, we'd have been really busy. Where are the gunships? We were glad to have gunship cover. The gunship's pilots were swashbuckling guys. They flew by and shot the hell out of where they thought the enemy was. They were equipped with machine guns, grenade launchers, rocket launchers. Whether the gunships were with us on any mission or not, we had to land in the middle of many firefights, active firefights, and load patients. And many times, we didn't even know we needed gunship cover until we were landing and coming under fire. Improvised armament. That's because the Army decided we need to do something. We're going to put stuff on helicopters. This is a UE, and they put on the machine guns and the rocket launchers and the grenade launchers. But eventually, we did get a gunship. It was called the UE Cobra, 1967. And then later on, after Vietnam, 1986, the Apache came along. It looks like these two guys were probably both James Bond flying. 57th Medical Detachment pilots, 1965. That's us. And here I am. For some reason or other, I don't know where my hat was. Everybody had a hat but me, and I must have showed up with my helmet, because I think that's what's under my left hand. I also don't remember this being taken. Years later, someone sent it to me, and I had no recollection. I mean, I climbed up on top of a ship, and I didn't remember it. I also am not sure why we were holding weapons, because we were non-combatants. We were not allowed to shoot back. They were allowed to shoot at us. That was different. We carried an AR, I guess 15 at the time, and we also had a 45, and that was to be used in case we got shot down for self-defense. And you notice my name is spelled wrong. There's no D in my name. And this 219 means if you want, I can get in my phone and show you the 219 misspellings of my last name that I have accumulated since 1983. We often hear on TV today that we live in a violent world. In the old days, middle of many civilians in the old days actually inserted themselves into the middle of the battlefield after the battle was over. Back then, it was standard practice to leave the wounded on the battlefield to wait for evacuation or death. Evacuation often took days because evacuation, am I blocking you? Nope. Evacuation was not considered a priority. During civilians would get out on the battlefield and scavenge the bodies of the dead and wounded for veterans. And if they saw an evacuation team getting near, they were known to slit the throat of the still alive soldier to keep them quiet. Dr. Baron Dominique Leray of Napoleon's army stopped leaving wounded on the battlefield, and he developed a system where, evacuation system. And strangely enough, these carts were called ambulances volantes. Did I do okay?
Sound great.
Okay. Flying ambulances. These ambulances did fly. Not all missions went as planned. This was a night landing, and Jim and Bill were coming in a very large open clearing. There was one tree sticking up a lot higher than the others, so they found it in the dark. And they tumbled in, and next morning we went out and got them. No one was killed. No, I don't think anyone was really hurt. Why helicopter flies? Here's where I lose control of this presentation. My only friend here, Hugh, and I were, and I bought this. I don't know what you bought. But I'm going to use this to talk about what I'm about to talk about. One aside, after I got it home, or maybe I got to the car, I turned it over, and it says, "Made in Vietnam." Well, they ought to know what they look like. The blades. Cyclic control is between the pilot's legs. It's a stick, and when you move it this way, it goes that way, and this way, so on. Cyclic control. Collective pitch is like a bar on the left side. You pull up and you increase the bite on the blades. When you increase the bite on the blades, you must add power because the blades are now having wind resistance to them, so they slow down. You can't have them slow down. That's not good. So you have to increase power when you add angle to the blades. the tail rotor, keeps the tail behind. I know the tail's always going to be back there, but I'll explain more in a moment. Keeps the body of the ship from rotating. And you control that by the foot pedals. You want me to stay in that big field? The first day in primary flight training, the instructor takes you to a huge field, and he says, stay in the field. And he handles, at a hover, he handles the collective pitch, left side bite on the blades, and he handles the foot pedals. He says to the student, handle the cyclic control. Big problem. When you move the stick, let's say we're going this way, it doesn't take much movement to move a helicopter. You get used to doing it, you sort of think about it, and that's enough. But a student is just full of adrenaline, right? So he moves it a lot. So off it goes, but it doesn't go off right away because there's a delayed response coming down through the blades to actual movement of the ship. So since he moved it too much, and it didn't move, by the time it does get ready to move, he's already moved it again. So that's why it's hard to keep it in the field, because now he's going the other way too, and it just gets crazy. Taking off in a helicopter. Now I'm going to say this real fast because I want it to be as chaotic as it really was the first time. The pilot opens the throttle to increase the speed of the rotor. The pilot pulls up slowly on the collective pitch. The collective pitch control raises the entire swash bait assembly as a unit. This is the effect of changing the pitch of all rotor blades at the same time. As the pilot increases collective pitch, he depresses the left foot pedal to counteract the torque produced by the main rotor to keep the tail behind. The pilot keeps pulling up slowly on the collective pitch while depressing the foot pedal to keep the tail behind. When the amount of lift produced by the rotor exceeds the weight of the helicopter, the aft brake will get light on the skids and leave the ground. Coming down, you do the opposite. What that means is, when you're going up, you got to counteract the rotation because the blades go one way, the ship wants to go the other way. So when you come down, the ship's going to go the other way from the blade slowing down, so you have to hit right foot pedal. So you're adding, I'll tell you about that in a second, you're counteracting the rotation, it's chaos. After a while, you hardly think about it, believe it or not. Pencils, tail rotors. Think about it this way. If you took two pencils, put them together, put a rubber band around them, and wound it up, and let it go, the pencils are not going to fly. But as they head for the floor, they're going to spin in opposite directions. That's with a helicopter. Blades go one way, the body of the ship wants to go the other, and you have to have a tail rotor to keep that from happening. Manual power control. That's, in the earliest ships we flew, the first ship we flew was this little thing, sort of like MASH. That's a H-23 manual power control. This was the H-19 Chickasaw, second ship we flew. It was an awful ship, very old, very underpowered, and they were manual control. And what I mean by that is when you pull up on the collective and you have to add more power, you like on the end. So when you pulled up, you had to roll on power to keep the blades from slowing down. When you went down, you had to roll off power. And then you had to hit right pedal, and I think, see, I told you I was going to lose control of it. The UH-1D and B flew the UE synchronized. When you pulled on the collective, it was synchronized control, and the ship the synchronization system added the amount of power that you needed to keep the blades going. And when you pushed it down, it synchronized also, and it worked wonderful. A lot easier. Trees too close? The power of a Yui was amazing. Now, this ship, compared to the ships that came on later, was underpowered, but to us, especially coming out of an H-19, unbelievably powerful. In advanced training at Fort Red, Alabama, the instructor would take you to very tall trees, put you in front of them and say, take off. And you would say, you mean that way? Because the H-19 sort of took off like this. And he'd say, no, way. And so you pulled power in a Yui and you cleared those trees. You had all you needed. It could go straight up. Not a good idea, because if the engine quits, you go straight down. I'll talk about that in a minute. If your engine, you'd rather be flying an airplane or a helicopter? Airplane. In my opinion, because something there's control again. Harry Reason would say, if your engine quits, you're dead. You go straight down. But in actuality, you got forward airspeed. You would, first of all, you get rid of all your bite on the blades, the first thing you do. And you adjust the rate of descent, and the blades are still spinning, right? And there's energy in those blades because they're spinning. So when you get to the bottom, you flare the ship back to slow it down, and you got collective pitch energy in the blades, and you pull all you got, the energy is used, and you put it on the ground. So theoretically, no, actually, if you're in an airplane, you need a place to land. You need a field with no cows, no ditches, no rocks, so you can put it down and slide and roll, whatever. But with a helicopter, theoretically, you just need a hole in the trees big enough to put the ship into, and if you're good enough and the circumstances are right and you're high enough, you can auto-rotate safely. And actually, if you have to fly into the trees, because there is no place to land, an airplane has to fly into trees. A helicopter can zero out airspeed and fall to than flying into trees. That's my opinion. Have you ever been in Life magazine? That's me, I'm in Life magazine. That was a major ambush, and actually, I may have been in Life magazine because we probably had 3 ships going in and out because there were so many casualties. So if there are two or three other pilots today making a presentation, they're telling their group that they're in that ship. We were in that ship. The guys in the back. Our crews were made up of 2 pilots, a medic and a crew chief. The crew chief was responsible for keeping the helicopter flying, so he had a vested interest in making sure it did fly. And the medic, of course, was the doctor on board. On many occasions, the medic and the crew chief were the most important members of a mission. Our medic and crew chief were the precious cargo that the wounded saw up close and personal. These guys trudged through waist-deep rice paddies, going out to get wounded. They fought through tangled jungle growth to get patients. They climbed down or up rugged mountains. They hung in the skids with outstretched hands, pulling people in. They jumped into watery depths. They tore through burning cockpits. They hugged a jungle penetrator as it took them down through canopy. And many times they did this under enemy fire. And while flying back to the aid station or the hospital, they kept them alive, and they did what they could to keep them alive. And in many cases, the crew chief, if he'd been flying long enough, he didn't know about medical stuff, but he had learned enough that he could help out. Because sometimes the medic was really busy. We didn't just go pick up one person very often. We picked up several, so he was really busy. When the medals were awarded, pilots we usually got the higher heroism awards. That's the way it was. But after you've been flying a while, your opinion was everyone on the ship should have gotten the same award. The first enlisted man the 57th Medical Detachment killed was Specialist Simmons. Now I want you to remember, we were learning as we went along. Alan Alda invented medical evacuation and MASH, right? No, those little helicopters picked up people. You had the two livers on either side, and they flew them back to, their eyes were probably big as saucers, not like. But in Vietnam, we had a ship that we could put people into, and a powerful ship. So we had to develop, the guys, really, the 2 years before I got there, we sort of developed what we did. What was medical evacuation? So anyway, we were learning as we went along. The ship was under heavy fire. Our medic, Tiny, left the ship to go after the wounded. They called him Tiny because he wasn't. The pilots were not aware that he had left the ship. The pilots took off and left him, not knowing he was not in the ship. By the time they got back, he was dead. What we learned from Simmons' death, the standing operating procedure was changed. If a medic or a crew chief was leaving the ship, they had to announce over the intercom that they were unhooking and they were leaving. We did not leave the ground until they were back on board and hooked up. And they told us they were back, hooked up, and then we could leave. Vietnam, a history, the first complete account of that war. That's the title of a book I found in a bookstore. I'm about to tell you a story about a great American, Major Charles Kelly. In this complete history of the Vietnam War, Major Kelly is not mentioned, but John Kerry is mentioned twice. Kelly was not the first commander. I think he was the third. But we think of him as the founder because of the procedures and the mindset that he instilled in what we did. Sylvania, Georgia, that's where he's from. Sylvania, Georgia. Joe Stilwell wanted pilots for more important missions. He was the son of World War II's Vinegar Joe Stilwell from China or Burma or something like that. Transport. And came up with a plan of action to train, use the word train, the people on the ground to know what dust-off was. They didn't know yet what dust-off was. So his plan of action was, he stationed himself in the Mekong Delta at Sac Trang. He took 2 ships and he went and lived down there. And he flew out the dust off, bring medical attention. To do when they needed us. Flying was not that common yet. During the day, at what we General Stilwell was being transferred out, and Major Kelly came up with this plaque, and he put 5 crosses representing his 5 ships, and he put the 5 tail numbers there, and he said something like, "Yeah, General, my ships, here they are." And General Stilwell must have had a sense of humor, because he's smiling anyway. General Stilwell, 1966, his plane crashed in the Pacific Ocean. No bodies were ever recovered. Was on the ground not to land because it was too hot. He landed anyway, or he was landing anyway. Again, he was advised to leave the area, and he responded, "I'll leave when I have you wounded." And at that moment, he was shot through the heart. The ship went out of control because of his body taking the hit, rolled over. It was at a hover, rolled over and crashed. Major Kelly died doing the job he loved to. Read this list for yourself, or I'll read it to you, and think about that book, Vietnam, A History, the first complete account of Vietnam at war. While in Vietnam, Major Kelly received the Air Medal with 18 Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with 1 Silver Star, and he was in Vietnam less than 6 months. He was a busy man. Spare parts are very important, so that's the day or 2 after he died, they were in there getting the spare parts they needed. What we learned from Kelly's death. The pilot who was not flying, we had 2 pilots, remember, at the moment kept his hands and feet on the control, just sort of shadowing what was going on. And if the pilot flying was shot, the second pilot, the shadow pilot, could better control the ship because he was there. He wasn't sitting there and all of a sudden had to reach and start grabbing things. We did not learn from Kelly's death. We did not learn that we did not land if the land was hot because it was our Kelly was called in for a critically wounded patient. Remember that, critically wounded patient. We found out later that the critically wounded patient was an American advisor and transport on our had been pressing Kelly for command of the unit inside the 2 ships in Sac Train. He later was a Medal of Honor winner and he later was a Major General. But I'll talk about that in a moment. Kelly gives in to Captain Brady. Kelly kept Captain Brady off. Sometime in June, Kelly finally told Brady he could take over on July. that to keep flying exactly the way Kelly taught us to fly, without hesitation, anytime, anywhere. As the years went on, depending upon who there was sentiment that dust-off should not go into active firefights. It was crazy over the years. It kept changing back and forth. You couldn't go out on a single ship mission. You had to have 2 ships. You always had to have good cover. We had to go. When we had to go, the gunships were not always available. How to earn a Medal of Honor. This is Major Brady here. Oh, 2-star John Brady. To make a long story short, throughout the day, Major Brady, now a major on his second tour in Vietnam, utilized 3 helicopters because the first 2 could not fly any longer, and picked up 51 seriously wounded men. Dust-off. Medal of Honor, Michael Novosel. This is he enlisted in the Army Corps before Pearl Harbor, February of 1941. He was too short to be accepted into flight training. He read somewhere that you were taller when you first took off. Of action in the street without standing up. Facility, his stretcher was placed right next to the height measuring machine, and he stood up. And he was and the sergeant turned him down. Arguments ensued. Eventually, the flight surgeon gave in and signed off and let him go to flight school. In World War II, he flew bombers with a pillow behind his back. He probably always flew with a pillow behind his back. He planes. He was flying for Civil Airways in 1973, and he decided to go back into the military. Air Force Reserve rank of lieutenant colonel, and went back into the Army as a warrant officer. He wanted to be, he was 42, and he wanted to be a flight instructor. The Army decided he was to fly dust-off. The Army always knows best, right? He flew helicopters in 2 tours in Vietnam as a dust-off pilot. Fort Rucker, where we had today, did back then, to Fort Novosel. Novosel was a great man. Rucker was a great man also. I'm almost getting political here, so I'll move on. Lagniappe, what's that? In French Southern Louisiana, lagniappe is used to denote a small bonus that a friendly shopkeeper might add to a purchase, like a 13th donut to a dozen. It means extra. I'm going to continue and finish up this presentation with a series of lagniappes. 3 bags. To Benoit, northeast of body bags. As we hovered up to the bags, we were told that they were dead. These were our first dead Americans. We stared at disbelief. Those 3 bags are the tip of the iceberg. Safe flying in flight school. We were taught to fly safely in flight school. Proper angle of descent, slowly bring the ship to a hover 3 feet above and 3 feet behind the panel on the ground, or all the way to the ground on top of the panel. We got very good at safe flying. In Vietnam, this kind of flying would get you killed very quickly. Safer flying at treetops. To avoid ground fire, from higher up we would get a bearing of where the landing site was. We would quickly drop down the treetop level away from the LZ, landing zone. We approach flying nap of the earth at a high rate of speed, many times trees that we were. We might fly right over the enemy, but by the time they saw us, we were gone, we hoped. We dropped into the LZ, loaded the wounded. We would use the same technique over the trees to get up airspeed and pull collective pitch to get to that safe altitude as quickly as possible. As I said earlier, the Yuri was powerful. The ship rose like an elevator. It was really a thrill. Every time it was a thrill. Safer flying from up high. Above 3,500 feet, we thought we were safe from ordinary ground fire. So we needed to get from 3,500 feet to the ground quickly. If we flattened the blades out, put the nose hard and hard to one side or the other, the ship would fall like a rock, almost. As Harry Reasoner would have said, it was falling like a rock. As we approached the LZ, we would level out, pull the nose back hard to reduce airspeed. At the ground, push the nose forward, drop collective pitch, and put the ship on the ground and load the wounded. And we would leave using the same low-level elevator ride technique in the prior slide. Down through the trees. Heavy jungle, no landing area nearby. Ground troops might have even had to blast away trees to make a hole big enough for us. We would hover down through the hole. The 4 crew members looked all around the ship for tree branches that might hit the main rotor or the tail rotor. The main rotor would take care of many branches by itself, but the tail rotor. And we would shift away from the obstacle. So we'd go down, and then, oh, we've got to go this way, oh, we've got to go, and eventually get to the bottom. Sometimes we might not be able to land because of the trees that had been blown away. We reversed the procedure on the way back up. Doing this at night increased the pucker factor. Vicks Vapor Rub. One of the guys in the unit got this idea. A ship with blood all over the floor, all over the litters, all over the wounded themselves, all over the medic and the crew chief was not a pleasant place to be. All ships carried a jar of Vicks Vapor Rub, and we shoved it up our noses to overcome unpleasant odors. Tail of the ship toward gunfire. Provided we could tell where the gunfire was coming from, we always landed to load our patients with the tail of the ship in that direction. Reflect some of the rounds. That's a wish-filled statement. If you remember the audio you heard at the beginning, they were called flimsy, thin-skinned crates. The ship itself did not deflect rounds very well. One thing for sure, though, we did not want to be taken off low and slow in the direction of where the fire was coming from. So if we were facing the other way, we'd take off that way, and every second we were getting further away from Guys. People capacity. The Army would express capacity in weight. My unofficial people capacity was 7 American soldiers we carried one time and 17 Vietnamese soldiers on another occasion. And my friend Vincent from Vietnam is laughing. We also went on to carry wives, children, mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, family dogs, and pigs. And one time we increased our people count by delivering a baby in flight on the way back. Smoke. The friendlies threw smoke to let us know where they were and where we were to land. When we called for smoke, the VC were known to throw smoke also, to try to get us to land in the middle of them. We started using a system, remember we were learning, whereby we identified the color of the smoke, and the people on the ground would confirm that color. If we saw 2 of the same color, we'd start over. Zippo. In the 1960s, there were commercials being run about people who had been saved because of their trusty, powerful flashlights. One night, pickup, we landed to a Zippo lighter because the people on the ground did not have flares. So we landed, yeah, I said that, okay. We talked about sending this story to Zippo lighters and becoming famous, but we never did. That's probably not the smartest thing, because the enemy had Zippo lighters too. And yeah, the enemy had flares too. If a flare came out at night, it might be the bad guys. The blades are so long. An example, the H-19 operates 350 RPMs. At that RPM, the H-19 noise was horrendous. It was hard to even think with that much noise when you first got in them. But after a while, if the RPM changed even the smallest of the sound, it had gone up or it had gone down, and we would adjust accordingly. Remember, in H-19, you had to roll on your power. B, D versus Black Hawk. We flew the B and D models. The D model was larger. Many of us preferred the B because we thought it was more maneuverable. We felt the D sort of floated before you could put it on the ground. Floated too long. Today's Black Hawk seems to us old-timers to be way too big, too slow, and probably floats too much. The old-timers have never flown a Black Hawk and might not know what we're talking about. Black Hawk certainly has more carrying capacity and medical equipment capability. Benoit Aviation Pickup, Part 1. In 1966, I sent this story to Reader's Digest for publication. I'm expecting to hear back any day now. I had great admiration and sympathy for the ground troops we picked up. They were often dirty. Surroundings, they were often wet, they were often hot. They had to eat field rations. My situation by comparison was better. What we did was downright dangerous too. But we had a clean place to sleep. We had decent we could go drinking. We had 3 times maid who shined our shoes and washed our clothes, and periodically we could go downtown and eat a steak. The guy on crutches said, We went to Benoit one time, and the patients were not ready. And we shut down the ship, and I was out, we were out, both of us out. I was sitting on the skid, and out of the aid station came walking wounded, bandages, crutches, limps, whatever. So they had been wounded, and they were being treated. And after a while, I'm sitting on the skid, and the guy on the crutches, I remember, maybe that far in front of me, it's my handsome son there, he stopped talking to me, and he looked up at the ship, and he looked up at the plexiglass, which was above me, and he said, "I would not have your job for any money in the world." This is the guy who I had such sympathy for, and he didn't want our job. I guess we're more comfortable with what we're trained to do. On today's nightly news, if 3 of our soldiers are killed in an overseas conflict, it is going to be major news at 6 p.m. or whatever. According to the History Channel, in a 3-month period of time during World War II, the mighty 8th Air Force, in an attempt to stop German petroleum production, lost 922 heavy bombers, and 10,000 crew members were killed. Based on those numbers, I would not want the 8th Air Force. To Saigon Street. That's a medic saying hello to another medic. The medic with the gun in the prior slide happened to be downtown when the embassy was bombed on March 30th, 1965, and he was instrumental in saving a lot of people's lives that day. I was later shot on one of my ships and had a hell of a life after that because of the injuries. Over the years, things got worse. We lived a long time, though. That's what it was all about. I believe when I had you, Major Kelly, I knew you'd come, an unidentified Marine infantryman in Iraq in 2008, and I'll come and get you. Chief Warrant Officer Williams, 2011. John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher, economist, member of Parliament, and a civil servant, he said, the degrading degree state of mind feeling that war is much worse. Which is more important than his own personal safety, was a miserable creature by the example than himself. I don't know what to do with medical evacuation, but I love the quote. It's a small world, the story is. Lieutenant Jack, Milton Lee Olive III, the grenade, and the Medal of Honor. He got the Medal of Honor. Lieutenant Jack was out on patrol, several people in his close vicinity, and a grenade came in to the middle of them. And Milton Lee Olive jumped on the grenade, smothered the explosion, and died. Dust-off ship came in to take he and others who were wounded out. Lieutenant Jack was all excited. So he went up to the ship and he started banging on the side, and the pilot in the left seat turned and looked at him, and he said, you know, something like, "Get him out of here, quick!" You know, he was excited. And the pilot said, "Okay, Jack," because I was a pilot. I had gone to high school, small world, and college with him. And here in the middle, all of a sudden, people didn't recognize me until I said, okay, Jack. And to show you how life can be changed by what happens, Jack has 10 children and 35 grandchildren. How would all those lives have been affected or not existed if Jack had died that day? As a matter of fact, Jack is the reason I went to flight school, because I was leaving campus one night and he was going into one of the auxiliary buildings. And I said, where you going, Jack? And he said, something about, they're starting up a flight training program. And I followed him. I didn't know where he was going. I thought he was jumping out of airplanes or something like that. But I followed him in and sat down, and it was the beginning of flight training, ROTC, and the Army paid for me to become a single-engine land pilot. And then, of course, once you got in the military, we didn't see, well, we did see, but everybody flew helicopters. Of the 100 people roughly 100 people that graduated in our class, 3 went to Germany. 97 went to Vietnam. And on the wall where we were debriefed after we flew, there was a map of North and South Vietnam that went from floor to ceiling. They never mentioned what that was, but we found out. If you enjoyed this presentation, I'll be glad to do it again for any unit, any organization you're with or have influence with. You can contact me at that number, at that email address. Notice it's Zoom Buggy with 3 O's instead of 2. Brent has the address, and Brent included it in the email that he sent announcing today's meeting. And if that doesn't work, contact Brent and he'll get us together.